Very excited to welcome back the great Andy Schectman back to the show to help guide us through some of these headlines as the market and the world slides continuously further and further into chaos. Welcome back, Andy.
Great to see you again, Elliot. It's good to be back again.
Absolutely. So let's just dive right into what's going on. Markets are suffering. Here's a headline. Companies are beginning to panic. Experts say China's lockdowns will make inflation and the supply chain nightmare even worse. A few days later, you have this out of the CEO of Whirlpool saying inflation challenges are real. Whirlpool cuts guidance, warns shortages to persist for the entire year. That's all of 2022, shortages. What is your take on what is going on and what are the impacts of this?
You have greater inflation with a slowdown in the economy coupled with higher taxation, little or no economic growth. This is stagflation, which ultimately could lead to hyperstagflation. And you put it all together with already tenuous supply chain issues, more lockdowns in China, slowing of commerce going back and forth. I think this is a new reality. And I think if you need that new refrigerator, you better get out and order it right now. I know this to be a fact because we are redoing our kitchen, and sub-zero refrigerator 1 year is what we're told. And I mean, 1 year, that's insane. So, and that's a best guess, right? Who knows what a year from now brings. So I guess the moral of the story is that I see a government addicted to spending. I see ultimately a slowdown of the economy, and I see global de-dollarization. All of these things are contributing to an already tenuous supply chain problem. You add into it more lockdowns in China, it's only going to make a bad situation worse. This is our reality for a while, year, 2, 3, who knows? But it's not a short-term fix, that I can tell you.
Yeah, I don't think people quite understand the impact of this because they are saying shortages for a year. That means sticky inflation that cannot be controlled at all or manipulated away for another year, which means that they're going to be kind of forced by the market to raise rates.
No, but they told us that inflation was transitory too, right? And
Yeah.
and you know, I mean, everything they say is disingenuous. If they realize it wasn't transitory, why are they continuing and have continued to add to their balance sheet through the whole process? Why are they continuing to foster the conditions that are making inflation sticky and not transitory? I think you have to take what they say with a very, very small grain of salt. But you're right. Where you're going with this is right. And it's going to get worse. There's no question about it. In my mind, mostly because the world is looking to divest of dollars, which is going to increase the inflationary effect here, which will only increase the rate of rate increase, not by the Fed, but by the market, which slows down the economy, which creates the environment for stagflation. And I think we're there. I think it's happening. And when you see countries openly negotiating with one another, usurping the dollar, it's coming. And so, yeah, I think this is going to be a big problem, probably the biggest problem that the Biden administration will face the last half of their run.
Yeah, because the reason the Federal Reserve was able to do this money printing experiment, pump and prop up stock markets artificially, was because there were these kind of, stable supply chains. And now it's kind of the worst situation. And so my question is, normally in election years, governments find a way to kind of get reelected at all costs, maybe pressure the Federal Reserve, do some sort of money printing experiment, give people free money to get elected. Is there anything that the government can do to keep this thing alive for a little bit longer, at least until election day?
Not without completely losing credibility. No, I mean, and so no, I don't think there's really anything the government can do at this point. they've lost their ability. Their tool bag has been whittled down to next to nothing. If you have a federal funds rate right now at 1/4%, which is basically zero, what do you do? I mean, what tools? The Federal Reserve has very little in the way that they can do legally. They can raise and lower rates, and they can buy U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities if they're Fannie and Freddie, and legally that's about it. So their tool bag is empty. When you have interest rates at 5 or 6 or 7% in a healthy economy, you have latitude. You can raise and lower rates, but when you have it at 1/4%, there's nothing you can do except go nominally negative as the world reserve currency. But at the same time, you have them talking about getting serious on inflation and selling their balance sheet, quantitative tightening, not quantitative easing. And this is what their mantra has been for the past several months. If they reverse course, as everyone thinks they will when it gets real bad, what does that signal to the rest of the world? And I think they're pretty much out of options. So that's the way that this is looking, is that we're running out of options, and we've been able to keep the game going for a very, very long time. But at this point right now, no, I think not without a complete and total loss of confidence in the Fed. And, there's no way to save face if you reverse course that quickly in an effort to get an administration facing, horrible approval ratings reelected. I think it's a losing battle, quite frankly.
Yeah, the one thing the government had was the ability to print money and kind of stimulate the economy as much as they could. And now they cannot print money anymore, which is a serious, serious problem. And so one thing I wanted to put on the screen, because it speaks to kind of your de-dollarization analysis. US dollars reserve status takes a hit. It was 65% in 2015, tumbling down to 59% in 2021. The trend is down as far as a percentage of global currency reserves. So you're right, governments are moving away from the US dollar. And so I guess they can smell weakness, right? They can smell blood in the water right now in America. Is that kind of what you're saying?
To me, it was so glaring in September when Russia signed that deal with Saudi Arabia and Nigeria. We'll protect you. Well, it's interesting, Elliot. I ask a lot of people, even my clients. I live here in a very nice gated community in Southern Florida. It's a beautiful golf community, and people here are successful. And I ask them, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? And none of them get it. None of them. Nobody. None of them understand what makes the dollar the world reserve currency. These are very successful people who have no understanding of history, which in and of itself is a problem. But, it's the protection of the Saudi kingdom that gives the dollar the world reserve status, period. In Saudi Arabia, the head of OPEC said, we will value oil globally in dollars, period. You protect us. You give us ammunition and munitions and teach us how to use it and have our back. We will only sell oil globally in dollars, but that's over now. And now not only do you have a nuclear power protecting them, you have Nigeria signed a contract with China. Saudi Arabia is signing it with China. India is signing it with China. Russia is signing it with China. All these BRICS nations are breaking away from the dollar hegemony and signing contracts with China to be paid in yuan, a yuan denominated bond, actually, which is convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. But this is for their oil and for their energy. We have weaponized the dollar. That is the key to all of this. Not only have we alienated some of our allies, but we have incentivized our foes into finding another system through the weaponizing of the dollar. We have created the de-dollarization by weaponizing the dollar. You look at what Trudeau did. That's in the back of people's minds. Like, wow, could a government make a fascist type of, decree where by doing something as simple as supporting a cause, my money gets frozen? There are entities that are saying, geez, what happened to Russia? Could that be us next? Could we be kicked out of SWIFT and have all of our assets in the West frozen? So we have forced our foes into thinking outside the box. This is the SIP system we've talked about, the cross interbank payment system that the Chinese have, where you're forcing people into other forms of settlement. And when you look at the Chinese Belt Initiative, the Belt Road Initiative, connecting 75% of human population using the digital yuan, put all these pieces together. You have, look, in the West, call it 1 billion people. The rest of the world, 7 billion people that are now moving away from the dollar, that are being indoctrinated into a new Chinese digital yuan that is, I think, ushering in a new era of commoditized backed currencies, where if it's not backed by something tangible, no one's going to trust it ever again after what we did to the world reserve currency, the mismanagement of it, the hyperinflation potential of it. When you see countries that are massively accumulating gold for the last several years, and now offering to, like, for example, talk about arbitrage. Let's just talk about this for a minute. I'm kind of all over the place, but it's all going to the same place. What you see happening right now, Russia says to the friendly nations, you pay us in gold or rubles, we'll sell you oil at a 30% discount. So what are they doing? They're going in, they're for example, on the COMEX market, they buy a contract. They then send it over to the UK, what's called exchange for physical, where they can take that contract and get paid in a much more liquid market, the LME, and take possession of gold, physical gold, who then give it to Russia for their oil at a 30% discount. They take that oil, which has now been sterilized, basically, and then they sell it into the market and make a huge profit. All of this is pointing to, well, look what's happening. You got Russia, instead of selling their oil for dollars, they're selling it for gold. And so you are seeing the big countries, you're seeing the oil producers. They don't want dollars anymore. They would rather have, in this case, gold or ruble to help strengthen their ruble, which, look how fast it went back up to 52-week highs after our sanctions. So, and that's because that's the power of gold, where it will help to stabilize a broken system because it's real money. But all of this is happening where there's a demand, a massive loss of demand for the dollar, and a greater demand for other currencies and for hard assets. And that is the beginning of the end of the US dollar. And all of this will only exacerbate the already tenuous supply chain problem. So it's all one big reinforcing loop. And I think de-dollarization is a trend that will continue. Why would anyone want to receive dollars that are being inflated away at such a precipitous pace? Or buy our treasuries earning next to nothing, even though the rates are almost at 3% on the 10-year treasury. Inflation's 3 times that. So why buy the treasury? And mind you, when we get to 3% across the board on rates, an average rate of 3%, you're talking almost $1 trillion a year just in interest payments. You're talking a dollar that is in really big trouble, because if rates rise, it all collapses. But rates have to rise because of the de-dollarization and because of the inflation. It's a deal, Elliot. Everything is very fluid, but everything is pointing towards the dollar losing its supremacy. So much so that Fed Chairman Powell comes out 6 weeks ago and says there's enough room for more than one world reserve currency. It's happening. And if you think supply chain problems are bad now, wait until the dollar is no longer the singular world reserve currency and dollars get dumped. Not only will there be a supply chain issue, but the costs of everything in US dollars will go up precipitously, making things worse as the economy is slowing down. Hyper stagflation. We've been talking about stagflation for a long time. It's something that the Fed refuses to acknowledge, and it's the worst possible outcome, but it's what I see right on our doorstep right now.
Absolutely. And it seems like as the markets go down, the broader stock markets, commodities are starting to outperform a little bit. And so I guess, you're CEO of Miles Franklin, best of breed gold company for precious metals. And so what are you seeing in terms of supply chain in the silver gold market? Any disruptions there? Because demand is surely picking up.
I have been saying for a long time that it will define the marketplace, the lack of supply. I got a lot of heat for that over the last 2 years talking about it because people think I'm just trying to talk my book and incentivize people to rush to buy metal. It's really not true. What it is, I'm just forward seeing where I think things will be, because with every single month that has passed since really February of 2020, it's become harder and harder and harder and harder and more costly to secure product, to the point where sovereign issued silver coins are next to impossible to get with any regularity. I had 150,000 silver kangaroos just land in my warehouse, of which I'm still 30,000 short. We can't keep them in stock. And those 150,000 coins I should have had weeks ago. And, it's taking longer and longer and longer, and it costs more to get it. And the sovereign issued coins are as difficult to get as anything I've ever experienced in 32 years of business. Fortunately, I had a client from Singapore sell me $3 million worth of 10 ounce and kilo kookaburras that we have in stock. But, normally it wouldn't matter the amount you wanted to spend in any of the major sovereign coins: Kangaroo, Krugerrand, Philharmonic, Britannia, Maple Leaf, or Eagle. Now it's a massive challenge. And this is with just a slightly growing realization. What happens when the mainstream realizes that the dollar is in big trouble? What happens when there's some sort of seminal event? OPEC says we're done taking just dollars, and the dollar gets dumped, and it's a moment that freaks everyone out, and the markets start to inversely react to a rise in rates, which will happen. When you get a massive awakening in this country, there'll be nothing left. And that's really what I've been pointing at for the last 2 years, is that yes, it's still there, it's available. Premiums are much higher, delivery delays are much longer. But when it's not just the pimple on the elephant's ass that's buying gold and silver, it's the entire elephant running through the revolving door as fast as it can, because it just watched. Do you remember in March 2020 when the market snapped? It lost 40% in a week, the S&P, and the Dow just got clobbered. Well, of course, the Fed came in and rescued. One of these days, they're not going to be able to do that any longer. And that's how fast the market would collapse. And in that event where people are watching all of the profit they've made since '08 evaporate in the blink of an eye, there will be a realization that in terms of where do you put your money, that precious metals are one of the only few places that are outside the system that are inversely correlated to the US stock market. It used to be that bonds were inversely correlated. They were called risk on, risk off. Bonds are no longer inversely correlated to the US stock market. They have lost that inverse correlation. They are positively correlated. We've talked about this great reset, Elliot, for a long time, and you hear Klaus Schwab, and I never really thought it was possible. But look at the backdrop. You have a government that has blown up the money supply to extreme levels never seen before, where asset prices over the past few years have become unrealistic. House prices, stocks, bonds, everything has become way, way inflated. And in terms of valuation, distorted. We've talked about how Austrian economics calls it the crack up boom, where you have a massive expansion in credit, which creates distortions in price, misallocations of resources. There's your supply chain problems. But you have these huge price increases that are not realistic based upon faulty premise of cost of money, interest rates, and how easy it is to get it. When all of that changes, when rates begin to rise, here's your great reset. You have all-time highs in stocks, bonds, and real estate, right? So what happens when rates do rise? All three collapse quickly. But what makes it collapse fast enough and also takes out the fourth pillar? Dollars. Well, what if OPEC says, you know what? We like the way things are going with China and Russia right now. We're going to open up to everyone, any currency or hard asset that wants to purchase oil. You want to purchase oil, we want gold, we want yen, euro, yuan. Maybe we just don't want only dollars anymore. Whatever the decree is, maybe they say we only want gold or Bitcoin or whatever it may be. In an event like that, if that happens, and you can see how this is already starting to happen amongst the BRICS nations, if that happens overnight and the dollar gets dumped globally, you have a dollar that comes flooding home, and there's way more dollars offshore than there are domestically, because every country in the world for the last 50 years has had to own dollars to buy energy. It is the foundation of every single currency on the planet. If you don't have dollars, you don't own oil. Well, that's changing. And if that all of a sudden precipitously changes and the dollar gets dumped and they come flooding home, the dumping of the dollars pushes interest rates through the roof, which collapses the three pillars of wealth: stocks, bonds, and real estate, and the fourth pillar, dollars. They all collapse at the same time. There's your great reset. Everything blows up, all of it blows up at the exact same time. They come in with the new central bank digital currency, peg it to gold. And I think there's a high probability the BRICS nations lead the way in that type of pegging and that type of a maneuver. But one way or the other, you want to talk about how you could possibly see a great reset, how all of this adversely affects precious metals like that. That's how fast it would happen. On a Monday morning, you wake up to a new reality where the dollar is no longer, just like Powell said, the only singular world reserve currency. Things overnight rapidly change. Markets collapse as interest rates rise. Everything is brought down to a common denominator, including the US dollar, and there is nowhere to run any longer, with the exception of gold and silver, which are inversely correlated to all of these markets, including the dollar. So it's an island of safety. It is not about getting wealthy. It is wealth. And that's the thing that people need to understand. And the reason it's getting so hard to get, Elliot, is because the whole world out there is experiencing inflation. You have inflation at World War II highs across most of Europe and Asia. You have people realizing that, hey, are we going to get kicked out of SWIFT, or is our government going to pull a Trudeau type of fascist move? We need to find plan B. And that plan B for a lot of people globally has been gold and silver, which is making it much harder here in North America to get the lion's share of silver, which comes from across the Atlantic. Here you have the US and the Canadian Mint, that's it, and some refineries. Over there, you have South Africa for the Krugerrand, you have the United Kingdom for the Britannia, Australia for the Kangaroo, Austria for the Philharmonic, and not to mention all the Swiss refineries, PAMP and Valcambi and Credit Suisse, and on and on and on. Most of the metal that we would want is across the globe, but the same type of issues are facing most of that part of the world as well. So you have more people awakening and competing for a smaller pool. Sounds kind of like price inflation, doesn't it? Where more money chasing fewer items. Well, as more and more people wake up to the necessity of those items and all of that money flies into that arena at once, it's over. That's what I see ultimately happening. And you can see it already beginning to happen. It's starting to speed up because it's getting much harder to get, just because of the expansion of the hard asset community here in North America. So I think it's going to be a big deal. I think supply chain problems won't just be centered on refrigerators and consumer goods, but we'll see it in precious metals. We'll see it in energy. We'll see it in food. And I think that, you keep hearing about food shortages. Who's the largest owner of farmland in North America? Bill Gates. Google all of the fires at food processing plants, meat packing. Google that in 2021. It'll blow you away. There must have been 100 fires at food processing plants across the board in the United States. A list this long, I read it in the International Forecaster the other day, and you walk away saying there's not a chance in hell this is a coincidence. You got Gates buying up all the farmland. You got them talking about food shortages, and literally about 100 fires across the United States in 2021, all of them in food processing plants. Something's going on, Elliot. They're trying to lower us all down to a common denominator, and no better way to do that than to weaponize the dollar and incentivize our foes into finding another system, which precipitates the final dumping of dollars, which collapses everything. And then they can blame Putin and Chinese instead of the Federal Reserve for creating this problem. They have a villain, and his name is Putin. And that's exactly, if I wanted to write a script on how to reset, the Great Reset, jack everything up to all-time highs with record money creation, all inversely correlated to a rise in rates, and then kick out the Russians out of the SWIFT system, confiscate their money, and show the world what happens when you cross the US. And bang, all of a sudden everyone says, screw this, time to find plan B. And when plan B is implemented and the dollar is dumped globally, you now have the Great Reset and the villain to point a finger at, and it absolves the Fed of the majority of the blame, even though they are responsible for all of it.
Do you think there's a globalist entity that wants to see the collapse of the US currency so that there could be a one world?
Yes. And I never thought it would be possible. I do. But look at the way that they are behaving and the pieces. Now, take a step back from that. That same global entity, do you think that has anything to do with the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank? Aren't they the ones in 2019 that reclassify gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset? Haven't the central banks been massively buying gold using the manipulated price to run cover? Hasn't the IMF come out and said we want a new Bretton Woods? Hasn't Zoltan Pozsar come out and said we are in the midst right now of Bretton Woods 3, a commoditized backed economy? You can see it's all starting to happen if you open your eyes. And the thing of it is that people don't want to believe it. So yeah, I do. And as crazy as that sounds, because look, Elliot, I bought gold and silver every 2 weeks for 32 years based upon it being wealth, not to protect myself from this type of an event. I never even thought it was possible. But if you really want to have a one world entity, a one world order, or maybe even two, where you have the Asian and the rest, or the BRICS and the rest. Yes, I mean, you blow everything up to all-time highs, and then incentivize an event that will collapse the dollar, which then immediately springs up interest rates. Because if the Fed was really serious about getting tough on inflation, what the hell are they waiting for? Why wait and tell, oh, we'll do 0.5% in 45 days? How about do 5% right now? Like Paul Volcker did in 1980 when he raised rates to almost 20%, stopped inflation in its tracks. Bang, stopped it. That's the type of decision you would have to make. But what would happen? Well, you default on everything. It's the reset, because those levels of rates would make paying off the national debt impossible. It would blow up the stock, bond, and real estate market, which are all inversely correlated. And that's where all the wealth is. So if you really want to blow everything up, you got to raise rates to that Volcker moment. And there's Zoltan Pozsar again, said, we need a Volcker moment to wake people up. If you have the Volcker moment, meaning Paul Volcker, the way back when, raising rates to 20%, in this economy, the way that asset prices are positioned, it's your reset. You start everything from scratch because everything collapses. The bond market loses 99% of its value. The real estate market, look what happened. The rates haven't even gone up, but 0.25%. And look at rates on the 30-year mortgage have nearly doubled in a year. What happens when rates really start to rise? you blow up the real estate market to the nth degree. Stocks, bonds, real estate, and the dollar all at the same time, and you have an enemy that you can point your finger at. He did it. Putin did it. No, we did it. We did it to ourselves. But do I think that that is part of the agenda? A lot of people think that's what the virus was all about, that they would try to release a virus that would end the Keynesian-based system where all economies would have to do the exact same thing: lock down, inflate, blow up the system, start over. It didn't work. This might be even more diabolical. And then you throw into it the food shortages, Gates buying up all the farmland, fires at all the food processing plants, fertilizer being impossible to get. I mean, look at it all. It's put it all together, take a step back. They call it the fallacy of composition, where the individual parts in and of themselves are not as relevant as the whole damn thing put together. And put it all together, and hell yes, I think it's possible, Elliot. I think there could very well be a whole group of insidious, insane sons of bitches who want to bring the U.S. down to a common denominator. And it's possible under the circumstances that we find ourselves in, and you conveniently have a villain you can point your fingers at, to pull it off.
Yeah, wow, seems pretty convenient. So if people want to have insurance against this turbulent system kind of unraveling, where can they go to protect themselves with precious metals?
Send us an email at info@milesfranklin. Please put the early stage investor in the subject line. I personally will make sure that your listeners get the best price in the United States on what we have. We are running a special right now on the 10-ounce kookaburra, the kilo kookaburra, which is a bird from Australia, for those of you who don't know, and also the kilo koala. These are all really beautiful coins in stock, ready to go. We have other things, but this to me is a sweet spot. I was fortunate enough to have the ability to buy this from Singapore, of all places, and it is in stock and ready to go. So, but you don't have to call or send an email to place an order. We answer questions too, and we really want to work with your listeners out of appreciation. It is so important for people like you, who the alternative media. I don't think people, maybe even you, don't get how important it really is, because we are all being so led astray right now by the mainstream, that if we aren't searching out through alternative means truth and real information, we're all doomed to end up like the sheep that are led to slaughter. And so it's an honor to have been on this show with you as much as I have over the last year. I would love to continue to keep doing it. And send us an email. By the way, our new website, I keep telling people this, it's about 95% done. I never would have thought it would have been so challenging, but it is. And there's a lot of code, especially as it pertains to taxation and all the different states and all this stuff, but we're almost done. But in the meantime, info@milesfranklin. Early stage investor sent me in the subject line. We'll send you a current inventory. We'll answer your questions. We'll call you if you want to talk. You can call us if you want to talk, but we'll make it a good experience, Elliot. And just from the bottom of my heart, thanks for the relationship, having me on the show.
This discussion is for informational purposes only. Please consult a certified financial planner when making any decisions about investing. And do your own research before making any decisions. Investments are risky, and you can lose lots of money in them.